I think when the season starts, we'll notice that this isn't the last we're going to hear of this. Hey there folks, and welcome to this video. Here I'm going to be talking about an interview that Craig Slater of Sky Sports News has done with Formula 1 Supremo Stefano Domenicali, in which, well, the big thing that's been stood out and been running the headlines is that F1 is not going to be kneeling for races anymore, with the idea being that it's time for action rather than gestures. There's a bit more that's said. You can check out the interview in the description below. I would honestly urge you to do it. But where do we go from here? Well, let's start off with some context, shall we? After the murder of George Floyd by Derek Chauvin in 2020, a lot of sports decided to adopt the gesture of kneeling as a display against racism. Now, the symbolism of it has changed over time. I personally think back to when Colin Kaepernick did it, when he was still playing for the 49ers. That's, what, 2015, 2016? He said that he got the idea from a friend who said, this is what you do during the national anthem if you've lost a comrade. So, this is a friend from military experience, so it came from a military message that was adopted in an anti-racism message that then came back up and now has the attached symbolism of how Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. And the outrage over people saying racism is bad is extreme. Like, to the point that coming up to the end of last season, there were gruesome images last year online on social media in which somebody had decided to Photoshop Max Verstappen onto Chauvin. And, of course, Lewis Hamilton then got photoshopped onto George Floyd. Because, I don't know, apparently saying racism is bad is bad. But anyway, something that stood out for me from this interview was Domenicali saying that F1 doesn't need to be political. Or F1 doesn't need the politics. Which I think is woefully ironic. Regardless of how you see F1, if it's entertainment, if it's a sport, if it's whatever, political is something that it is. I mean, Domenicali will know he quit Ferrari over the politics of it. So the idea that, oh, F1 doesn't need to be political or F1 can stop being political is flat out wrong. The problem is that you talk about political and everybody immediately thinks, well, Boris Johnson versus Keir Starmer over here in the UK, like most bipartisan things, or whoever the Prime Minister or President is. Politics isn't just that. And even if it was just that, F1 has a track record of interfering in those kinds of ways. They didn't go to South Africa after mass outroar following the continuation of apartheid. The only time they returned to South Africa was during the dismantlement of the apartheid state. A lot of people seem to forget that. F1 has been political in the past. And FISA and the FAA have been, especially in that kind of politics that people don't like, even though, like I said, everything is inherently political. You talk about Mohammed bin Sulayem, president of the FIA. That election is a political election, even if you don't like to think that it's political. The same with F1. Just because it's these kinds of politics, ones that you don't like, doesn't mean it's not political. Which is where I take disagreement with Domenicali. But the thing is, he knows what he's saying. He himself, ironically, is being political in saying that F1 doesn't need the politics. But let's focus on, for the rest of this video, the action that's being taken. On this channel, I talked about every End Racism and We Racism display that F1 did. And towards the end of it, it started to get very repetitive. Like, I basically had a pre-prepared script that I was going to read out every week before talking about something in particular. And the reason why was because F1 wasn't actually doing much. F1's talked about the scholarships. Well, Domenicali was like, oh, we've funded 10 university student programs in England and Italy. Well, in the UK and Italy, to be more specific. I actually don't know the ins and outs of the fees in Italy. I know here in the UK, if you were to fund 10 students' university degrees, that would be a total of, what, £500,000? Most likely. And F1's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it is an industry. Regardless of what you say, if it's sport, if it's entertainment, if it's whatever, it's an industry. £500,000 is like pocket change. Now, if it was committing like 5 million, that would be starting to be something. But I feel like F1 invests more into its press program to say that it's doing good than the actual good it does. I mean, that's how I feel. I don't have anything to back that up, but that's how I feel. And the fact of the matter is, F1 really hasn't done that much. Most of the action that we've seen F1 supposedly doing has been done by the drivers. Look at the social media boycott that happened during the week of the Portuguese Grand Prix. That was, what, last season? That wasn't arranged by F1, that was arranged by teams and drivers mimicking the English Premier League. And I think that's where we're getting to, isn't it? Does F1 actually do things? I mean, we saw with Mercedes, this was one of the things that was a speculation over Lewis Hamilton's contract renewal for the 2021 season. One of the things that was supposedly holding up was Lewis wanted more funding and support going into the Accelerate 25 initiative that Mercedes has. It's not really something that you think about, is it? Mercedes has always seen this kind of strong team for backing these kinds of bits and pieces. Daimler has some kind of record for it, which they say on their own website, on I think Mercedes' own website, feeds into the feeling of war guilt. The idea that because Mercedes and Daimler as companies were complicit in the atrocities committed under the regime of the government of Germany between 1933 and 1945, they feel like they have to do other bits and pieces to start to promote inclusivity and diversity and challenge things such as racism. But it takes someone like Lewis Hamilton to actually push for those changes in the first place. And this is the thing, as we get near 10 minutes on this video. Whenever I did a video on the We Racers One display, I always ended it with the message saying F1 needs to be better and do better. F1, the organisation, hasn't. It talked the talk. It's not even begun to walk the walk. It's not even begun to crawl the walk. I don't think it's even facing in the right direction. I think it's face planting a wall. Like, leaning up against it, like, how do I get from here to 2 steps in front of me? And that's the thing. Lots of people don't like it. I think most people don't like it when their own politics aren't represented in sport. Even if that kind of politics is people saying that they've had enough of politics. They don't like it when something they disagree with is represented in the sport. They also don't like it when something they agree with isn't represented. I mean, that's how humans are. That's how political we are. Put simply, this ain't it. And what stands out to me is that Domenicali felt he had to say it. Because it could have quite feasibly happened quietly. It could have just not been talked about. And at the start of the season, nothing happened. A couple of people would be like, huh. And the same lot of us who were saying it, who are talking right now, would be like, well, are we surprised? But this, the action to say this in an interview, shows an active decision. has been made. One that they're looking to promote. Which, ironically, considering Domenicali said he's had enough of it, is its own brand of politics. And on that note, thank you for watching.